It's great to be here with everyone. Today's Torah portion is Beshalach. If you're following in the blue Oscar Chumash, you can find it on page 366. If you're following in any other Chumash, it's in the book of Exodus, chapter 13, verse 17. So, I had a 10th grade teacher. His name was Rabbi Garfinkel. And I'll never forget how it was this week's Torah portion. And we had our lunch break. And we all came back to class after the lunch break around whatever time it was, 2 o'clock or so. And he sat down in his chair and he looked at the class and he said, "Kids, did you hear the news?" And we all looked at him like, "Well, what's the news?" Like we thought there was breaking news in the world. We said, "No, what happened?" He said, "Paro is letting the Jews go free." And that's the way he began his lesson of this week's Torah portion. Because this week's Torah portion is Parshah Beshalach Paro et ha'am. And it happened when Pharaoh sent out the people. In other words, after all of the plagues that we went through, we've been following the story of the birth of Moses and Moses standing up for the Jewish people, and then God telling Moshe at the burning bush to go take the Jews out of slavery, and all the 10 plagues and the warnings, and time and again, Pharaoh refuses to let the Jews go free. And finally, Paro says, enough is enough, no more. There was the killing of the firstborn. Paro was afraid for his own life because he was a firstborn. And he says, go. And the Jews are finally actually leaving slavery right in the opening verse of this week's Torah portion. But here's what the Torah tells us in the very opening verse. Parshah Beshalach Paro et ha'am, and it was when Paro sent out the nation, V'lo nacham Elokim derech eretz Pilishtim, that God did not lead the Jews by the way of the land of the Philistines. God took a lengthier, roundabout way, but not through the land of the Philistines. Why? Ki karovu, even though it was closer, because God said, Ki amar Elokim, God is saying to himself, Pen yenachem ha'am, perhaps the people will reconsider birotam milchama, if the Philistines attack the Jews as they're leaving Egypt, even though it's a shorter route to go through the land of the Philistines. But if the Jews are attacked, vishavu mitzrayma, they will return to Egypt. Wow. Think about the message of this verse. It says everything you need to know that is going to be a foreshadowing of everything that's going to occur. Because here the Jews are leaving Egypt. And you may think, Mazel Tov, and they lived happily ever after, right? What could be better? They're free from slavery. All their problems are behind them. They're now a free nation. God broke down Egypt with 10 plagues and set them free. But even before they leave, God says, I'm going to take them on a longer route, not through the land of the Philistines. Why? Because I'm concerned, God says, that if they go through the land of the Philistines and the Philistines come out to attack them, the Jews, and here we have the immediate insight into the mindset, the fragile mindset and emotional and psychological condition of the Jews after hundreds of years in slavery, that God recognized they may be physically free, but they still are living with the slave mentality. And therefore, when they have the first confrontation, the first war, the first challenge, they will throw up their hands and say, let's go back to Egypt. And this is really, as I said, a foreshadowing of what's going to happen now for the next 40 years in the desert. The Jews that left Egypt never made it to the land of Israel. It was only their children that went to freedom. Because unfortunately, time and again, they relapsed. They made a golden calf, the story of the spies. When God sent the spy, wanted to bring them to Israel, they said, we want to send spies. And the spies came back with a very discouraging, disheartening, pessimistic view of the ability to conquer the land of Israel. And they didn't show the courage, the willpower, the determination, the faith necessary to be that generation that goes into the land of Israel. And God recognizes it right from the get-go and says, I'm going to take them on a longer route, because if they see war, if they see confrontation, they will surrender and retreat and choose to go back to slavery. They'll choose to return to slavery, which is unimaginable. Why would somebody ever go back to slavery? Because to have liberty and freedom takes courage. You have to be willing to fight for it. You have to be willing to defend it and stand up for it. And the Jews just didn't have that mettle. They didn't have that. They didn't have that inner strength to be able to accomplish that. And we actually don't have to go much further than this week's Torah portion, because even though God takes them in a circuitous route, when he brings them to the Red Sea, what happens? They see the Egyptians running after them because Pharaoh's heart is hardened and he pursues the Jewish people. And we're going to find in just a few verses later how the Jewish people look up and they see the Egyptians running after them and they see the sea before them. And I'm going to quote you some of the verses, and it really speaks for itself. The Jewish people lift their eyes, and they see Egypt running after them. The Egyptians are coming after them in hot pursuit, and they became frightened, the Torah says, and they cried out to God. And then they turn to Moses and they say, and this is maybe the most sarcastic line in the whole Torah. They say to Moses, their leader who just took them out of slavery, is there a shortage of graves in Egypt that you had to take us to die in the desert? Why did you even take us out of Egypt? We're dead. We're finished. We have the sea in front of us, the Egyptians behind us. If we're going to die here, we could have died in Egypt. It would have been easier. There are plenty of graves in Egypt, no shortage. And then they go on to say to Moses, who just performed 10 miracles, plagues through God. And they say, isn't this what we told you back in Egypt? Leave us alone. Let us remain slaves in Egypt, because it's better for us to be slaves in Egypt than to die in the desert. And Moshe has to strengthen them and say, don't be afraid. Don't fear. You're going to see the salvation of God. You're going to see miracles. You're never going to see these Egyptians again. God is going to do battle for you. Just forge ahead. And that's when, of course, Moses stretches out his hand and the sea splits and the Jewish people go through the sea. And then their Egyptian enemies pursue them. God closes up the sea on the Egyptians, and the Jews see their enemies drown before their eyes. And then they burst out into joy and jubilation. And at that point, you may think, okay, thank God, now everything's going to be wonderful, right? Happily ever after, because now the Jews saw their Egyptian enemies drowned, and surely everything's going to be wonderful now, because they just sang a song of tremendous praise to God. And here I'm going to tell you something very interesting. Every Torah portion at the end tells you how many verses are in that Torah portion. This Torah portion, if you look at the end, it says there are 116 verses. And here's something quite interesting. If you look at this week's Torah portion, you will find that the singing of the song of the sea, and then Miriam singing with the women, spans the first 58 verses of the Torah. Midpoint, 58 out of the 116 verses leads us to the end of the Song of the Sea. The next 58 verses of this week's Torah portion, which is the second half of the Torah portion, is a litany of complaints and kvetching and challenging Moshe Rabbeinu. And just to give you a little bit of a taste of some of the things that happen, God provides the manna, and then the Jews cry out that they don't like the manna. They want meat. They don't want just the manna from heaven. And then God sends the quail, the slav. And then once again, the Jews don't follow the instructions about how to collect it. And then we have the Jews complaining about water, lack of water, losing faith, and is crying out and saying, why did you take us? I'm just going to give you the direct quote. They were thirsting for water, and they said to Moses, why did you take us out of Egypt to die here with our children and our flock from thirst? And Moses is so despondent and discouraged by the attitude of the Jews that he says to God, what am I going to do with this nation that you tasked me with freeing and liberating and traveling through the desert with? They say to Moses says to God, Od ma'at uskaluni, a bit more and they will stone me. Moses felt they were going to kill him. They're going to attack him like a mob. And sadly, the second half of the Torah portion is nothing but one complaint after the other. And here you see the way, despite all the great, I apologize, these calls are coming in and keep on Xing them out. But despite all the great miracles the Jewish people witnessed firsthand, experienced in Egypt, they quickly lost faith in God and in their leader Moses. Unlike at the sea, where it says they believed in God and believed in Moses, his servant. And that's because they were externally and physically free, but internally, in their mind and in their heart, they still had that slave mentality. And therefore God said, I'm going to take them in a roundabout way so that they don't have to encounter war with the Philistines, because I fear that if they encounter war, they will retreat and go back to Egypt. And here we have a very important lesson in life. And that is that freedom is a long journey. You don't go from slavery to freedom like this overnight. It's not like, oh, I was in the borders of Egypt, now I'm outside of the land, I'm a free person. It's a process. It takes time. And indeed, it took so much time that it was a span of 40 years until the next generation was raised in freedom and they were able to go into the land of Israel. And again, when we talk about Egypt, we're not just talking about a physical confinement. Whatever limits, inhibits, constricts, confines you physically, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and you want to go free from that, don't expect it to happen immediately. It's a process, it's a journey. There are setbacks. Sometimes there's relapses, like the Jews in the desert. You can't just immediately relinquish all of the negative habits and traits and beliefs that you've learned over a lifetime and suddenly just transform yourself overnight. Like the Jewish people, it's a long journey and it's a difficult process. But ultimately, freedom can be gained. But you need to be patient. And Moses was told by God, have patience. I know this nation is rebellious and challenging and difficult, but just work with them. And with time, they will come to freedom. And here we are today, thanks to that approach. And God says, sometimes I have to take a longer route to get to where we want to get. Because sometimes the longer route is the shorter route. I just heard this concept last night, actually, that imagine someone says to himself, okay, up until a mile, I don't need my car, I'll walk. But if it's more than a mile, then I'm going to drive. So it turns out if they have to go 2 miles, they get there in quicker time than 1 mile, because 1 mile they walk, 2 miles they drive. So because it's a further distance, they get there quicker, which means to say that sometimes in the Talmud, there's a concept of the short, long road and the long, short road. What does that mean? Talmud tells a story about this man who came to a city and he asked somebody, how do I get to this in this town? So the little child said to this man, do you want the long, short road or the short, long road? So he said, I want the short road, short, long road. So he said, okay, take this and this route. The guy followed the short route. When he got to the end of the route, which led him to the town, there were these tall hedges and gardens and orchards blocking his path to get to the city. So he came all the way back and he said to the kid, why did you tell me to go this way? There's orchards and gardens and hedges that don't let me get into the next city. He said, I asked you if you want the short, long road or the long, short road. You said you wanted the short, long road. So I gave you the short road to the city, but now you got to come all the way back and go all the way around to get there. So it's the short, long road, as opposed to you take the longer road, but ultimately when you get there, you get there. So what does this mean practically? What it means practically is that everyone's always looking for quick fixes in life, instant results. And there's a lot of gimmicks and a lot of advertisements about how to get rich fast and how to lose weight fast and how to, everything quick, quick, quick. But what the Torah is telling us right now, there is no such thing as quick fixes. There may be a lot of books out there telling you could do it quickly, but the journey to freedom, whatever it is you're looking for freedom from, it's typically the long, short road, not the short, long road. Short may be good. And the thing that obviously comes to mind, I think the most popular and common example is weight loss. Many, many stories of people who lost a lot of weight very quickly, but then they put it back on as quickly because they did it too quick. They did it in some kind of gimmicky way, as opposed to a gradual, long-term change of habits of eating, diet, exercise, but then it's sustainable, it's maintained. And that's the idea of God saying the path to freedom may be long initially, but then it will be short because it will be everlasting, as opposed to if you go for something really quick, because human nature doesn't change quickly. When you look at the way God created the world, even in nature, what does God show you? Nothing happens quickly in nature. The seasons don't change overnight. You wake up one morning, we change seasons. All the flowers are blooming. It's a gradual, slow process that takes many, many weeks and months till it changes. If you look the way day turns into night and night turns into day, God didn't make the world that, 1 minute it's light, next minute the lights go out, it's dark. It's not like the light switch in your room, It starts getting a little darker, and then there's sundown and sunset, and over the course of an hour, it gets dark. And then in the morning with sunrise, the same thing. Everything in nature that God created is a process. And what God is showing us in the physical is true in the emotional and psychological. We all want to become better. But the problem is sometimes we want to do it too quickly, and then we're disappointed that it didn't happen as quickly as we wanted to do it. And to change your habits, to change your nature, your character takes a lot of time and effort. And therefore, don't be discouraged, is what God says. It may take a little longer, but you'll get there. You'll get to the promised land, but you have to be patient. And the same thing is very true spiritually. I just want to add that a lot of times people become religious too fast. Like, I want to be religious, and they start keeping everything. And then it's called burnout, right? They crash because they did it too quickly. So even with Judaism, it's best recommended to go slowly. Start doing one mitzvah, and then with another mitzvah. Don't try to do it immediately all, because it may work for a little while, but sooner or later, it won't work. And you could apply it to almost every area of life. And that's what God says. I'm going to take the Jewish people in the longer route, because that ultimately will be the shorter route. So the Jewish people come to the sea. And as I mentioned earlier, the Egyptians are in hot pursuit, chasing them. And there's a famous midrash, the rabbis discuss this, and they say, and they apply it to the verses. I won't get into the verses because I don't know if everyone has a text in front of them, but basically there were 4 different opinions that we see in the verse of what they should do. Whenever there's a challenge in a Jewish community, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Well, according to this midrash, it was 4 opinions. There were 4 camps or 4 schools of thought how to deal with the danger, the threat of the Egyptians running after them. One opinion was, let's wave a white flag, surrender, go back to Egypt. That was one opinion. Second opinion was, no, let's not go back to Egypt. Let's jump into the sea and drown ourselves, commit suicide, but not go back to Egypt. The third opinion said, no, let's fight. We'll put up a fight to our death. And the fourth opinion said, let's pray to God for help. And Moses speaks to God. And what does God say to the Jewish people? And here the rabbis see it in the verse. He says to every single group, no. To the first group that said, let's jump into the sea, he says, stand still, you're going to see the salvation of God. To the group that says, go back to Egypt, he says, as you've seen Egypt today, you'll never see them again. To the group that said, let's fight, Moses says, Hashem yilachem lachem, God will fight for you. And to the group that says, let's pray, which you would think prayer is always good, God says, no, now's not even a time for prayer. So we shouldn't go back to Egypt, and we shouldn't jump into the sea and commit suicide, and we shouldn't fight, and we shouldn't, what should we do? And here's the one word directive. Vayomer Hashem Moshe. God says to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Speak to the children of Israel, and here's the word, V'yisa'u, let them travel on. But there's a sea in front of us. Doesn't matter, just travel on. And here we know the famous story of Nachshon, who jumped into the sea and he walked up till his knees and his waist and his chest and his lips, and then his nostrils, and only when it came to covering his nostrils, the water split. And again, a very, very powerful metaphor in life. Sometimes we're paralyzed by fear, or paralyzed by indecision, or we're paralyzed by doubt, and we're standing still, we're not moving forward. And God says, even if you're praying to me, now's not the time even to pray. It's time to take action. Just move forward. Start moving. Start doing. There's something called paralysis by analysis, right? Over-analyzing everything. Just start doing. Move forward. And God will split the sea that's in front of you. You're not moving because you feel there's this huge obstacle in front of you. You can't penetrate it. It's the sea. God says you'll see. Seas will split once you start moving in the direction that I told you to move. You do your part. Go up to your nostrils. Push as hard as you can, as far as you can go, and God will meet you there. And that's an incredible lesson about the Nachshon ben Aminadav jumping into the sea, taking, even in English, I love the English words, sometimes reflect great rabbinic or Torah teachings. And one of them is, take the plunge. You've heard that term 100 times. You got to take the plunge. Well, Nachshon ben Aminadav literally took the plunge. And he remains the example of having faith in God, and just as Moshe said, tell the Jewish people to go forward. And then, of course, the Egyptians pursue them. And sure enough, once they pursue them, the God covers up the sea with the water, and the chariots and everything gets drowned in the sea. And here the Jewish people break out in tremendous song of gratitude to God. And our rabbis say the revelations at the splitting of the sea were so amazing that even the children pointed to God and said, as we say in the Az Yashir every morning, Zeh Keli V'Aver, this is my God and I will glorify him, which means God's presence was revealed on the sea. And when you come to shul every morning, whether it's Shabbat or holidays or weekdays, we see every day, we sing the song of Az Yashir. And this Shabbat, of course, everyone will come to shul, and in synagogues around the world, when the Az Yashir is read from the Torah, we all rise and we sing along as we recall our ancestors crossing the sea 3,334 years ago. And we go back in time to that moment and experience it, relive it ourselves. There's so much to be said about all of this, obviously, but let's try to cover a little bit more of this week's Torah portion. Here the Jews just got out of Egypt. they're not going to get the 10 Commandments till next week. By the way, I always say, if you have a question or a comment, pretend this is a class. Thank God we have 23 people on the Zoom, so we're all sitting in a big room studying Torah together. And feel free, don't let technology get in the way of asking a question or making a comment. So the Jewish people are now finally free. And not only are they free from Egypt, but they crossed the sea and they saw their enemies drowned, which means they were physically free and emotionally free, because until they saw the enemies drowning, they could have thought, well, they're going to pursue us again. Once they saw their enemies defeated, they knew they were truly free at last. And what's the first thing, the first commandment that God gives the Jewish people in the desert? So the 10 commandments is not going to be till next week. And we all know the fourth commandment is remember the day of Shabbat and make it holy. And we know that when we make Kiddush Friday night, we all remember in the song, when we sing the Kiddush, we say, Zecher li'yetziat Mitzrayim. One of the reasons for Shabbat is that not only because God made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, but also because God took us out of Egypt. You're no longer slaves. You don't have to work 7 days a week. You're a human being. Every human being is entitled to a day off. And God made the world in 7 days. What do you mean? God made the world in 6 days. He rested on the seventh day. And our rabbis say rest is part of the creation process. You know, most people think when I'm resting, I'm not being creative. So maybe I should never rest. And the answer is no. Part of the creative process is that you need to take a day to rest, to rejuvenate, to be yourself, to not be under the pressures and the demands of the workplace or the marketplace or you think about today, advertising, right? Always demanding or trying to influence you to get this or buy that or experience this or that. And Shabbat, you turn it all off. Don't tell me what I need to get or what I need to buy or where I need to go on vacation. Like, I want to just be myself with my family. I don't want the demands of the workplace or the marketplace. And today, thank God, with technology, which is a tremendous blessing in many ways, but we all know that technology could also be a disruptive force. We have many members. We all know, right, that children live in different states or different countries. Well, thanks to FaceTime and Zoom, they could see their children and grandchildren every day. What a blessing, right? So on the one hand, technology brings you closer to people. Right now, we're all enjoying a Zoom Torah class. Thank God for technology. I could learn together and see each other. It's the biggest blessing in the world, right? But then you could have a husband and wife in a restaurant, or parents and children, everyone's on their cell phone. And maybe they're connecting with people in different parts of the country or the state. But because of that connection they're making with people far away, they're disconnecting from the people sitting around the same table. So they're getting closer to people far away on whatever technology they're on, social media, whatever. They're getting closer to people far away, but they're getting further away from the people closest to them. Rabbi Riskin was once here. He told a funny story. He said there was a couple got engaged in his city in Efrat. And he went to the engagement party. And a week later, he goes into a restaurant in Efrat. He sees this newly engaged couple at a dinner table. And each one is texting underneath the phone. So he went over to them and he said, I hope you're texting each other, So Shabbat is the day we put away the smartphones and we put away all the disruptions, the television and everything. We just focus on the people around the table with uninterrupted time. So we all understand that Shabbat is an essential day. I love the story that Stephen Covey actually tells, where this guy's walking in the forest and he sees two people sawing a log back and forth and back and forth. He goes on a walk, on a hike for a couple of hours. He comes back, the same two people are sawing the same log. He says, listen, you've been sawing the same log for 2 hours. What's going on here? We say, yeah, our blade is very dull. Why don't you stop and sharpen the blade? And they keep on. So we just get into autopilot. We work, and we don't stop to think, to meditate, to gain spirituality. to be able to sharpen our saw. So resting is a day of creativity. So the Jews leave Egypt, they're going to get the 10 commandments. The fourth commandment is, remember the day of Shabbat and make it holy. But even before we get to Mount Sinai, which is going to be 49 days later, now the Jews have to eat. So what does God do? He rains down the manna from heaven. But God says right here in this week's Torah portion, 6 days you shall collect the bread, but on the seventh day you shall not collect bread. It's a day of rest from heaven for Friday and for Shabbat. Now, right away in this story, we have so many beautiful lessons. The first lesson is when we go to work 6 days a week, we think we're creating. The truth is, it's like the manna from heaven. God is giving it to us as a gift. The Jews arrived every day, the manna was on the floor. Today we have to plow and plant and work and earn a living, but it's Hashem's gift to us. That's number one. Number two is that you may say, well, I have to work on Shabbat because I need to earn more money. God says, no, I'm the God who gives it to you 6 days a week. I will give you a double portion on Friday for Shabbat as well. I'll give you a blessing that Friday should be double, or the same amount of money you would earn in 7 days, you could earn in 6 days, and you could take the day of rest for yourself. And that is why on Friday night we have 2 chalot on the table. Why do we have double portion of bread, 2 chalot? The reason we have 2 chalot is because we remember that God gave a double portion on Friday for Friday and for Shabbat. But here's the key. Why is the first commandment that the Jewish people get, Shabbat? Because God says, okay, you went out of slavery, but I want to make sure you owe freedom. Because if you taste freedom once a week for 24 hours, you will love and cherish freedom. And nobody will ever be able to put you back into chains, into slavery, because it will be part of your very DNA and of your soul to crave freedom, because you will know the taste of freedom every single week. And that will preserve your internal freedom and your desire to be a free nation. And you will never let any other power or entity control you or take away from you your spiritual freedom and the ability as a human being to be free. And there's a famous line from Echad Ha'am that says, more than the Jewish people have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jewish people. That's what Shabbat does for the Jewish people. I see somebody made a comment, I think Janet, I just want to see what she said. Rabbi, isn't today a special day to say a prayer about the manna so we remember the blessings? Yes, there are those who have the custom of reading the section of the manna today from the Torah, and we're learning it, so it's good as well. As a segula. Segula means as a good omen for having the blessing of sustenance in our lives. Because again, faith is, as Moshe says to the Jewish people in Deuteronomy, that when we come to the land of Israel, we're going to grow fat, meaning materially, physically, abundance, and we will kick. What does that mean? It's a very ironic statement. Moshe says, beware lest you turn away from God because of the prosperity and the abundance you receive. When you become fat, meaning satiated, full, you'll grow arrogant and you'll say, oh, my might and my power brought me all this strength and success. So Moshe says, remain humble. Just like God gave you the manna from heaven, if God blesses you with abundance, with prosperity, with success, with material blessings, realize, yeah, you went to work and you used your mind and worked to achieve it, but really it's Hashem who sent it to you directly from heaven, like the manna from heaven. Let me see the other comment I just received. 1 second. Okay. So now we're going back to another question. Someone asked, why is it that Moses wasn't executed by God when he brought the plagues? And I don't want to get too far afield from our Torah discussion today, but at the 10th plague, he actually said to Moses, if you ever show up here again, I'm going to kill you. And that's when Moses got furious with him. And that's when he brought the final plague. So clearly he knew he was working with a man of God. and he didn't have the power to kill him because he knew that the retribution on him would be that much greater. So coming back to Shabbat, I want to just point out something very, very fascinating about Shabbat. And I love sharing it in the following story form. There was once an atheist who said to his rabbi, Rabbi, I want to discuss your faith in God because I don't believe in God. So I want to discuss it with you. So the rabbi said, great. When would you like to meet? And the atheist said, I'm available any day next week to come to your office and talk about God because I'm an atheist. You believe in God. I don't. I want to talk about it. He said, I'm available any day next week. And the rabbi says, next week? What's a week? He says, Rabbi, what do you mean, what's a week? WEEK, week. Rabbi said, I'm not familiar with that. What is that? He says, in your calendar, you have years, months, weeks, days. What do you mean, what's a week? I don't get your question, the atheist said to the rabbi. And the rabbi said, I know what a year is. Full cycle of the sun, 365 days. That is a year. I know what a month is. The cycle of the moon, right? From birth, waxes and wanes, and then it starts all over again 30 days later. I know what a day is. Sunrise, sunset. I know what a day is. He says, he says to the rabbi, the rabbi says to the atheist, I don't know what a week is. What happens during a week? Like day, month, year, there's a phenomenon, a natural physical change that indicates that span of time, day, month, week. But he said, when it comes to a week, nothing changes from one Sunday to the next, from one Saturday to the next. What? So the rabbi said to him, the only source of a week is in the Torah, in the Bible. God made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. But if you're an atheist, you don't believe in the creation. If you're an atheist and you don't believe in the creation of the world, that God made the world in 6 days and rest on the seventh day, why do you refer to a week? Take weeks out of your calendar, because there's no such thing as a week without the Torah and God creating the world in 6 days and resting on the seventh day. So when we sit down every Friday night and we make Kiddush and we sanctify the seventh day, the creator, and there's a designer and a builder and an architect to life, and life has a purpose and a meaning. And that's why the first commandment given to the Jewish people is the mitzvah of Shabbat that they get right in the desert. And as I said, every Friday night we have the double chalot to remember this miracle that God gave us in the desert. And just want to point out one thing about, we always talk about God, and God is hidden in nature. But really, everything is miraculous. I think it was Albert Einstein who said, either you believe everything's a miracle or nothing's a miracle. So what is the difference between a miracle and nature? The only difference is how frequent that miracle happens. So a miracle that happens once in a lifespan is called a miracle. The splitting of the sea is called a miracle. But the fact that I'm breathing now and living on oxygen, or the fact that I can see, or the fact that I could hear and you can see, that we call nature. We don't call it a miracle. But the truth is, the fact that we can see is an ongoing miracle. If God forbid somebody was born blind and at the age of 20, they open their eyes one day and they can see, they would say it's a miracle. But because you've been seeing from the moment you were born, you don't think of it as a miracle. But the truth is, we're experiencing miracles all the time. Now, think about a baby who was born in the desert, and every day they were born for 40 years, the manna rains down from heaven. If you would ask that child when they're age 30 in the desert, is manna from heaven a miracle? They would say, no, it's part of nature. It's like the way we look at the rain. Rain comes from heaven. So we don't, when it's raining outside, you don't say, a miracle, water from heaven. oh, that's precipitation and the clouds and the water, right? We have a natural explanation for it. But think about when that child turned 40 and it goes into the land of Israel and the miracle of the manna stops. And now they have to go in the field and plow the field and plant seeds in the ground. And they put these little seeds in the ground. And then a couple of months later, things start sprouting out of the earth, out of the dirt. And suddenly there's vegetation and fruits and trees. That kid would go, oh my gosh, it's a miracle. Out of the dirt came vegetables, tomatoes, cucumbers, bananas. Wow. How did the little seed in the dirt turn into a fresh apple tree? So the difference is the manna to that kid would be natural, because that's what he saw every day. The food coming from the ground would be miraculous. For us, it's the opposite. If we went outside today and we saw food raining down from heaven, we would go, that's a miracle. When we put seeds in the ground, we call that natural. But the truth is, there's no difference between natural and miraculous. All of nature is one big miracle. And just to go to the end of this week's Torah portion, because the end of this week's Torah portion deals with evil, and it deals with a nation by the name of Amalek. Right after the Jews left Egypt, and crossed the sea, and all the miracles were performed, a nation by the name of Amalek Hello? Oh, what happened? Yeah, I'm back on. Hello? Did you hear me? Good? Okay. So there's a nation by the name of Amalek that comes and tries to destroy the Jewish people. And the Jewish people didn't attack them, didn't enter into their land. They came out to the desert to destroy the Jewish people. Now, the Jewish people were just liberated from slavery. You know, Friday was Holocaust International Remembrance Day because it was the day that it was the liberation of Auschwitz. And we've all seen images of the Jews leaving the concentration camps, like skeletons. The Jews just left slavery, and along comes a nation and attacks them to try to destroy the newly born Jewish people. And God says to Moshe, get men together and go fight with Amalek. And Moses goes up onto the mountaintop, raises his hands in prayer, inspires the Jews. The Jews go and fight against Amalek, and they defeat Amalek. And at the end of the Torah portion finishes by saying that God says to Moshe, write this in a book, in a remembrance book, and teach Joshua to teach the Jewish people that they should wipe out the remembrance of Amalek from the face of the earth, from beneath the heavens. And then God says, the war against the throne of God, waged by Amalek, will carry on from generation to generation. And we know later in Deuteronomy, the Torah tells us, remember and never forget. And here we have the first example of anti-Semitism. Now, I want to ask an important question. I'm just going to switch out here because my batteries are low. I don't want to burn out here. I'm just going to switch here to the side. Amalek is considered the epitome of anti-Semitism. And we're told in every generation we have to be aware, we have to be ready to fight against Amalek. Of Amalek against the Jewish people will carry on in every generation. So I'm sorry to disappoint anyone here, but if anyone on this Zoom call was hoping that one day anti-Semitism will end, and when Mashiach will come, it will end. But until the Messiah comes, if anyone thought, you know what, we're going to solve this problem once and for all, and eliminate anti-Semitism. Well, the Torah told us 3,300 years ago that in every generation is going to be descendants, whether it's physical or spiritual descendants of Amalek, who will do what Amalek did, which is tragically attempt to destroy the Jewish people. Whether it's Iran today attempting, or whether it was Hitler, or in every generation, we're going to say it on the night of Passover. What are we going to say? In every generation, they rose up to kill us. So what is anti-Semitism? And the question is Amalek the first anti-Semite, or is Pharaoh the first anti-Semite? After all, Pharaoh drowned the Jewish babies and enslaved us. So why do we say Amalek is the enemy that we have to always remember and never forget? And notice the difference. Remember is the past. Never forget is the present. Meaning to say, remember what happened in the past and don't forget it in the present, because it could happen again in every generation. And it does happen in every generation. And therefore, if you don't remain vigilant, I once saw this great quote that said, freedom is not free, right? I mean, you have to fight for freedom. It's a sad reality, right? But in every generation, you need soldiers who are ready to go to war to defend liberty and freedom. Because if you don't defend liberty or freedom, it will be taken away from you. Same thing with anti-Semitism. You have to fight it in every generation. And it's an ongoing battle. It never goes away. There will always be the descendants of Amalek, whether it was Haman in the time of Purim, or Hitler in our last generation, or those terrorists who shot at the Jews Friday night, and the 7 Jews were murdered Friday night. There will always be Amaleks in the world. And Torah says you have to fight against them in every generation. Now, why isn't Pharaoh considered the first anti-Semite? And the answer is that, it says in Ethics of Our Fathers, there are 2 types of love. One is real love, and one is counterfeit love. What's real love versus counterfeit love? Anyone want to try to answer? What's the difference between real love and fake love? The answer is, as the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, when your love is dependent on something, I love you because some benefit, some enjoyment, some pleasure, some gain that I get because of you, that's not real love, because I don't really love you. Like you said here, it's a selfish love. I love you because you provide me with whatever you. Now, I may call it love, but it's not real love. And by the way, that also means if I say, oh, I love this person because they're beautiful. Well, what happens when they're no longer beautiful, right? Any love that is dependent on a reason is not true love, because when that thing is no longer there, the love is gone. However, love that's not dependent on anything, that is everlasting love. Now, the same thing is true on the other side of the coin with hatred. Take the same teaching of the rabbis and apply it to hatred. When hatred is dependent on something, God forbid, I hate somebody because they stole from me. I hate someone because they badmouthed me. I hate someone because, they were unkind to me, right? Whatever it may be. Well, if I remove that reason, then I don't have to hate them anymore. The person returns the money and apologizes. I could love them again. Or if they stop doing the bad thing they're doing. Because the love there's a reason for the love. That's why it's not real love. And if there's a reason for the hate, it's not real hate, because it's hate, but it's based on a reason. But when there's no reason for the hate, it's just hate for the sake of hate. As we say, there's unconditional love. There's something called unconditional hate. No matter what you do, I hate you. That's anti-Semitism. You see, Pharaoh isn't considered the first anti-Semite. Not only that, the Torah tells us, believe it or not, in one of the commandments later in the Torah says you cannot oppress an Egyptian. Not only because it's revenge, but because you were strangers in their land. The Torah says when you arrived in Egypt, when Jacob and his family came there, Joseph and the Egyptians welcomed them and were hospitable to them and were their host country and saved them in the time of famine, right? So you have an eternal debt of gratitude to them, and you cannot hate an Egyptian. Lo tita'ev mitzri. Ki gerim yitem, you were strangers in their land. And therefore, they're not considered anti-Semites. Why? Because the Egyptians had a reason. What happened? Pharaoh became insecure. The Jews were prosperous. They were multiplying, becoming powerful, becoming successful. And Pharaoh said to his people back in the beginning of Shemos, hey, these Jews are getting too successful, too powerful. They're going to overtake the country. It was out of fear and insecurity that they oppressed the Jews, as opposed to Amalek, who had no reason to attack the Jews. It was just pure hatred. And that's what anti-Semitism is. When people hate Jews just because they're Jews without any reason. Sometimes we as Jews overuse the word anti-Semitism. A Jew gets into a fight with a Gentile. Oh, he's an anti-Semite. He may not be an anti-Semite. Maybe he just doesn't like you. Maybe he has a gripe with you. Maybe you did something to him that made him angry. Not everyone who attacks a Jew is an anti-Semite. There could be legitimate reasons, just like there are plenty of people in the world who don't get along with other people for 1,000,001 reasons that they don't like people. It has nothing to do with the fact that you're Jewish. It's just he doesn't like something about you. That's not anti-Semitism. Not everything that's done to a Jew is, anti-Semitism. Maybe there's a good reason why the person's upset with me. So what is anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism is, I just hate you because you're a Jew, like Amalek. The Jews are going free. I'm going to come wipe them out. I'm going to attack them. And that's what God says. That pure evil has to be destroyed. Because if there's a reason why two people hate each other, they could reconcile. They could work on it. They could overcome their differences. They could forgive one another. But when the hatred is never going to go away because it's not based on a reason, there's no logic to it, there's no foundation to it. So there's nothing you can do to remove it, to repair it. In that case, the Torah tells us in this week's Torah portion, you must destroy it. You must defeat it. Just like the Allied forces defeated Nazism. Because there's no rational way to deal with this, to resolve it. You can't do diplomacy or try to talk sense to these people. And this is a mistake that a lot of people make, because as rational people, we always think that everything could be solved rationally. So if we talk to people and we explain it to them and we educate them and we do this, it will surely change their understanding of life and teach them not to hate. And there are a lot of people that could be taught not to hate 100%. But there are unfortunately people that, since there's no rational basis for their hatred, there's nothing you can say rationally that will take away their hatred. And those people, the Torah says, you have to destroy. You have to wipe them out. It says it right in this week's Torah portion. Wipe out the memory of Amalek. In other words, we always think, if we want peace, we have to talk to people and work with people and make peace. And that's true in most cases. But there are some cases that the road to peace is through destroying them. There are certain evil regimes in the world that will never change. And therefore, there's only one solution, and that is to destroy those evildoers. And that's the Amaleks in every single generation. And yes, one of the things it says about Amalek, so there are two comments. One was about baseless hatred amongst Jews. Yes, when we are not united, then our enemies gain strength over us. And number two, the second comment was that, the second comment was that one of the things it says about Amalek was that he attacked the Jews from the rear, which means the stragglers, the people who were the weakest, who were in the back of the camp as they were traveling. In other words, he was a coward. He went for the weakest, most vulnerable Jews. Someone asked if it was the women and children. We'd have to look that up. But I don't know if it says that it was the women and children, but it does say that it was those in the rear. I'm going to look it up as we speak. At the end of Ki Teitzei, the Torah says that again, and it says, that you were weak and weary, which obviously the Jews were in a vulnerable position. And Amalek came and attacked from the rear those who were straggling behind. So in this week's Torah portion, we have so many different subjects. We start with the Exodus from Egypt, but then we talk about the manna and Shabbat, and then ultimately dealing with Amalek. And one other point about anti-Semitism that rabbis point out is it says that the Jews cried out to God. They were complaining about the water and the food. And then they said, is God in our midst? In other words, we don't even know if God's with us anymore because we don't have water, we don't have food, we have all these problems. And our rabbis say the following analogy, that there was a father carrying his son on his shoulders. And they encountered a man, and the boy on the shoulder looks at the guy in front of him and says, do you happen to know where my father is? And the father's like, what? You're asking where I am? I'm carrying you on my shoulders. So the father takes the son off and puts him on the ground. So if you could ask such a question, I'm going to put you on the ground. You're going to have to walk for yourself. And when he puts the kid on the ground, a dog comes and attacks the kid. The analogy is God was carrying us on his shoulders. He took us out of Egypt, the splitting of the sea, the 10 plagues. And then the Jews say, is God in our midst? And God says, how could you even ask such a question? I'm carrying you in the first place. And God says, okay, I'm going to put you down. And then the dog, meaning Amalek, comes and attacks us. And the message is obviously that when we stop appreciating and showing gratitude to God for our protection, for our existence, then sometimes, God forbid, God will leave us to our own devices, and we have to face our enemies on our own without the divine assistance. So wishing everyone, like I said, this Shabbat has a nickname universally. It's known as Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of song, because of the song of the Jewish people that they sang at the sea. And it's customary to have more singing and more joy on the Shabbat. That's why at Palm Beach Synagogue, we're bringing a special cantor from Israel to bring more joy to the congregation. So going into Shabbat, remember that it's a very happy, joyous, singing type of a Shabbat. So wish everyone a good day and a good week ahead. And thank you all for coming. And we will see you soon at the next program or class at the synagogue. Thank you so much.